It was a quiet autumn evening in Crescent Falls, Montana. It was the kind of night where the air held a crisp chill and fallen leaves gathered in the corners of empty streets. The homecoming dance had ended hours ago, and most students were already home, reliving the night through pictures and whispered phone calls. But 16-year-old Hannah Lawson never made it back. She was supposed to meet her father at a nearby diner, a routine they had done many times before. He waited. Minutes turned into an hour. The calls went straight to voicemail. Something wasn't right. At first, there was hope. Maybe she got caught up with friends, or maybe her phone died. But as the hours stretched into the early morning, that hope quickly turned to fear. Her car was abandoned in the school parking lot, keys still in the ignition, and her purse untouched on the passenger seat. There were no signs of a struggle, no immediate clues. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. For days, search teams combed through Crescent Falls. Flyers went up, the local news covered the story, and volunteers walked the streets, calling her name. Her family clung to the possibility that she was out somewhere, waiting to be found. But that hope was shattered 4 days later when two hikers stumbled upon something in a drainage culvert outside town. A red jacket. A glimpse of fabric buried under a layer of dirt and debris. And then, the unthinkable, a battered body, barely recognizable, discarded like an afterthought. What happened to Hannah Lawson? How did a beloved teenager, with her whole life ahead of her, end up abandoned in a place no one was meant to find? The investigation would unravel a story far more disturbing than anyone was prepared for, a tale of obsession, deception, and a betrayal that struck closer to home than anyone imagined. The truth would take years to understand fully. But for Hannah's family, the nightmare began the moment she didn't come home. Police followed leads, interviewed friends, and examined every clue left behind. But the absolute horror lay in the details, the calculated decisions, the false alibis, the disturbing evidence that pointed to someone no one ever suspected. Stay with us as we uncover the chilling truth behind the murder of Hannah Lawson, and the secrets hidden beneath the surface of a small town that never saw it coming. Crescent Falls, Montana, was the kind of town where people left their doors unlocked and waved at neighbors passing by. A place where families had lived for generations, where children rode their bikes until sunset, and the most considerable excitement of the year was the high school homecoming game. Crime happened elsewhere, in big cities, on the news. Not here. But that sense of security was shattered in October of 1998 when 16-year-old Hannah Lawson disappeared after a school dance. Hannah wasn't the type to run away. She was a straight-A student, a cheerleader, and a girl who always did the right thing. She had a close-knit group of friends, a loving family, and dreams of someday becoming a veterinarian. The night she went missing should have been one of the best of her high school years. She had spent weeks looking forward to the homecoming dance, picking out a dress, practicing routines for the halftime show, and talking endlessly about the night's excitement. But she vanished between leaving the dance and when she was supposed to meet her father. The search for Hannah was immediate. Family, friends, and even strangers came together, handing out flyers, calling hospitals, and checking every place she might have gone. Her car was still in the high school parking lot, the doors locked, and the keys were left inside. Her purse sat untouched on the passenger seat. There was no note, no message, no sign of struggle. It was as if she had stepped away momentarily and disappeared. For 4 long days, Crescent Falls held its breath. People gathered at the local church to pray for her safe return. Her parents pleaded on the evening news for anyone with information to come forward. Officers went door to door, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual that night. Leads came in, but none led anywhere. Then, a discovery no one wanted to believe. 2 hikers walking near a drainage culvert outside of town saw something unusual, a flash of red against the brown and gray of the rocky ditch. At first, they thought it was discarded clothing, but as they got closer, they realized it was more than that. Beneath the scattered debris, they found a body. Hannah Lawson had been found. She had been beaten. Her once bright eyes were now closed forever. She was left in a place meant to keep water moving out of town, as if someone had hoped the earth would wash away what had been done. The news spread quickly. Parents held their children closer. Teenagers who had once felt invincible now questioned the safety of their town. The investigation began immediately. The police retraced Hannah's last known steps, trying to understand how she went from a crowded dance floor to a desolate culvert miles away. Interviews were conducted, and evidence was collected. But in those early days, one question remained unanswered: who had done this? And why? The truth was more disturbing than anyone imagined when it finally came to light. There was a name no one expected, a motive that made no sense, and a trail of clues that had been there all along, waiting to be uncovered. Join us as we retrace Hannah's final moments, the following investigation, and the shocking truth that would forever change Crescent Falls. Hannah Lawson was the kind of girl people noticed, not just because she was a cheerleader or popular, but because she had a way of making people feel important. She had a warm presence and a kindness that made her approachable. Teachers described her as a model student who never missed a homework assignment and always stayed after class to help struggling classmates. Friends said she was the glue that held their group together, always having the right words when someone was going through a hard time. Born and raised in Crescent Falls, she had lived in the same house since childhood. Her parents, Mark and Linda Lawson, had worked hard to give her a good life. Mark owned a small auto repair shop on Main Street, and Linda worked as a nurse at the local clinic. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable. More importantly, they were a close family. Sunday dinners, summer camping trips, birthday traditions, these were the things that defined Hannah's childhood. She had big dreams of becoming a veterinarian. She loved animals, often volunteering at the local shelter after school. Her bedroom walls were covered with posters of horses and dogs, and she kept a stack of animal care books beside her bed. She was already researching colleges, excited about leaving Crescent Falls and starting a new chapter. Recently, there had been another change in her life. She had started dating someone new. A boy named Daniel Brooks, a junior like her, was quiet and shy. Their relationship was still fresh, but her friends said she seemed happy. Not long before homecoming, she confided in them that she was finally ready to move on from her ex-boyfriend, Tyler Hayes. The night of the homecoming dance should have been like any other teenage milestone, filled with laughter, music, and the excitement of a night spent with friends. She had left the house in a burgundy dress, her mother snapping pictures on the porch. She had been seen smiling, dancing, and chatting with friends at the dance. Then, at around 10:30 p.m., she left. She was supposed to meet her father at a diner near the school, a routine they had done many times before. But she never arrived. Her father called, but there was no answer. He called again, but it went straight to voicemail. When he drove to the school parking lot and saw her car sitting there, untouched, he knew something was wrong. As the investigation unfolded, two names kept resurfacing, two men whose connections to Hannah were drastically different but who both had reasons to come under suspicion. Tyler Hayes had been Hannah's first real boyfriend. They started dating in the summer before her junior year, and for a while, things seemed perfect. But friends noticed changes in Hannah. She stopped going to certain social events and started making excuses for not hanging out. Tyler, they said, had a temper. He didn't like it when she talked to other guys or made decisions without him. By the start of the school year, she had ended things. She told friends she wanted to focus on herself, but they suspected there was more to the story. Tyler hadn't taken the breakup well. He started showing up unexpectedly, calling her late at night, and finding reasons to talk to her between classes. And then, at homecoming, multiple witnesses saw him watching her. Standing alone near the gym entrance, eyes locked on her as she danced with Daniel Brooks. When questioned, Tyler claimed he had gone straight home after the dance. But there was no one to verify that. His parents had been out of town that night, and his friends couldn't confirm his whereabouts after 10:45 p.m. Police searched his truck, bedroom, and clothing from that night. Nothing obvious stood out. But something about his demeanor, the way he answered questions and his story shifted slightly each time he told it, made investigators keep him on their radar. Aaron Lively had been teaching at Crescent Falls High for 6 years. He was well liked by most students and known for his laid-back attitude and hands-on teaching style. But there were rumors, stories passed between students, whispers in the hallways. He tended to be too friendly with certain female students, compliments that lingered a little too long and private tutoring sessions that felt unnecessary. Years earlier, a student had accused him of inappropriate behavior. The claim had been brushed aside, and no formal charges had been filed. Officially, nothing had ever come of it. Unofficially, some teachers had started keeping their distance. The night Hannah disappeared, Lively had been seen near the school's parking lot. A parent, waiting to pick up their child, recalled seeing a car matching his parked near the back exit. He later claimed he had just passed by on his way home, but his story didn't quite add up. And then there was the fact that his name had come up in connection to Hannah before. A classmate mentioned that they had overheard Hannah telling a friend that she felt weird around him weeks before homecoming. The problem? There was no hard evidence, no DNA, fingerprints, or security footage placing him near the scene, just a series of unsettling details that painted an uncomfortable picture. As investigators pieced together Hannah's final hours, both men were scrutinized. One had been openly fixated on her, and the other had a history that raised red flags. But the truth would take time to unravel. And when it finally did, it would reveal a far more complicated story than anyone had expected. The night of October 16, 1998, was supposed to be a celebration. The homecoming dance had ended, and students were piling into cars, laughing, heading off to after-parties or late-night diners. Hannah Lawson was among them. She left the gym around 10:30 p.m., walking toward her vehicle through the dimly lit parking lot. Her father was expecting her at Murphy's Diner just a few miles away, a tradition they had kept since her first year. But she never arrived. Surveillance footage from the school's security camera captured her walking toward her car, a slight bounce in her step, still caught up in the excitement of the evening. Witnesses say she had been in good spirits, chatting with friends as she left. But what happened in the next few minutes remains unclear. According to one witness, a student who had stayed behind to help clean up the gym heard a muffled sound, something between a scream and a struggle, from the direction of the parking lot. It was brief, barely more than a few seconds. The witness hesitated, glancing toward the lot, but saw nothing unusual. The noise was dismissed as typical teenage rowdiness, someone joking around or a couple arguing. No one thought to investigate further. Hannah's car was found where she had left it the following day. The doors were locked, and the keys were still in the ignition. Her purse sat undisturbed on the passenger seat, it was as if she had never returned to it. There were no signs of forced entry, shattered glass, or immediate indication of a struggle. But Hannah was gone. Her father had repeatedly called her cell phone that night. At first, it rang. Then, hours later, it went straight to voicemail. He assumed she was with friends and maybe she had forgotten their plan. But he knew something was wrong when he woke and realized she had never come home. He drove straight to the school, hoping to find some explanation. Instead, he found her abandoned car. By noon, a missing persons report had been filed. Friends, family, and volunteers fanned across Crescent Falls, searching for any sign of Hannah. Flyers were printed and taped to storefronts. Police questioned classmates, teachers, and anyone who might have seen or spoken to her after the dance. But hours turned into days, still, no sign of her. Then, on the fourth day, everything changed. 2 hikers found her. They had been walking along a wooded trail just outside town, near an old drainage culvert beneath the main road. At first, they thought they had stumbled upon discarded clothing, a piece of fabric caught on the rocks. But as they moved closer, they realized what they were seeing. Hannah's body was found lying partially inside the culvert, her dress torn and her arms covered in bruises. The dirt and gravel beneath her were disturbed as if she had fought back. Her hands bore defensive wounds, deep scratches, broken nails. She had tried to protect herself. The scene painted a devastating picture. Someone had placed her there, hidden her, hoping she wouldn't be found. But the forensic evidence told an even darker story. An autopsy confirmed that she had been held captive for at least 2 days before she was killed. There were signs of restraint, marks on her wrists and ankles indicating she had been tied. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, a final, brutal act that ended her life. The discovery sent shockwaves through Crescent Falls. The fear that had been simmering since her disappearance exploded into complete panic. Parents who once felt safe letting their children walk home at night now locked their doors before sundown. Schools increased security. The town that had once prided itself on its close-knit community was now on edge, haunted by the realization that someone among them was responsible. But who? And why? Hannah Lawson's body had been found, but the investigation was beginning. Detectives knew that the first 48 hours were critical in cases like this. But Hannah had been missing for 4 days, and any immediate traces of the person responsible were fading by the hour. They had to move quickly. The culvert where she was discovered was examined in detail. Tire tracks, partially washed away by rain, led to and from the site. Investigators took casts of the impressions, hoping they would later match a vehicle. They also found tiny fibers distinct in color and texture clinging to Hannah's dress. Lab analysis confirmed they were synthetic carpet fibers commonly found in offices or classrooms. The discovery raised more questions. Had Hannah been taken to a familiar location before she was killed? And if so, why had no one heard or seen anything? As detectives combed through Hannah's personal life, they made another discovery. A folded piece of paper was inside her school locker, tucked beneath textbooks and notebooks. The message was brief, handwritten in black ink. "Meet me after the dance. I need to talk." There was no name, no signature, just those 9 words. The handwriting was compared to samples from her close friends, teachers, and even past assignments she had turned in, but there was no immediate match. Whoever wrote it had been careful. But the meaning was clear: Hannah had planned to meet someone that night. Had she trusted this person? Or had she walked into a trap? With no immediate suspects, investigators turned to the people closest to Hannah. Tyler Hayes, the ex-boyfriend. Tyler was one of the first people questioned. He and Hannah had dated for over a year before their recent breakup. By all accounts, their relationship had been intense, sometimes volatile. Witnesses from the dance reported seeing him in the crowd, watching Hannah as she danced with her friends. Tyler claimed he had been home alone when asked about his whereabouts that night. But when detectives pulled his phone records, they saw something that didn't add up. Calls had been made from his phone around the time Hannah disappeared. The locations pinged off towers nowhere near his house. Confronted with this, Tyler became defensive. He insisted the calls were unrelated and that he had gone out briefly and returned home. But no one could confirm his story. Then there was Aaron Lively, Hannah's 32-year-old biology teacher. He had always been well-liked by students and known for being approachable and easygoing. But there were whispers, stories of inappropriate comments, lingering looks, and favoritism towards some female students. When questioned, Lively was composed. Too composed. He told detectives he had gone home after the dance and spent the rest of the night grading papers. But when asked if anyone could verify this, there was hesitation. Then came another problem. A school janitor reported seeing Lively in the building much later than he should have been. The staff lounge lights had been on past midnight, and Lively's car was still in the lot when the janitor left. If he was grading papers, why stay so late? Then came the moment that shifted the entire case. A detective reviewing security footage from a gas station near the school spotted something alarming. The grainy footage showed a car pulling into the parking lot at 10:45 p.m., just minutes after Hannah was last seen at the dance. The vehicle didn't belong to Hannah. A closer look at the license plate revealed a name. Aaron Lively. The teacher claimed he had gone straight home, the teacher who had no real alibi. As investigators pieced together the evidence, a chilling possibility emerged. Hannah had left the dance expecting to meet someone she knew. She had gotten into a car willingly. But what happened next, what led to her tragic fate, was still unclear. Detectives had their first significant lead. And now, they were closing in. The evidence against Aaron Lively had been mounting. The fibers on Hannah's clothing, the note found in her locker, and the security footage placing his vehicle at the gas station all pointed in his direction. But investigators needed one final piece, something undeniable. Forensic teams analyzed Hannah's clothing and the carpet fibers clinging to it. The results were conclusive. The fibers matched the lounge carpet in the teacher's break room at Crescent Falls High School, where the janitor had seen Lively lingering late into the night. With this, detectives secured a warrant for his arrest. March 12, 1999. Officers arrived at Lively's home early in the morning. He was still in his bathrobe when he opened the door, squinting against the rising sun. The moment he saw the officers, his demeanor changed. His expression tightened, and his hands clenched at his sides. He didn't resist. He didn't ask why they were there. He nodded as officers placed him in handcuffs and led him to the squad car. At the station, he was calm at first. He denied everything. He said he had nothing to do with Hannah's disappearance. He insisted the fibers on her dress meant nothing, she was my student. Maybe she brushed against a chair in the staff lounge. But when detectives presented the security footage of his car near the school the night she vanished, his face paled. When they told him Hannah had been seen in his car, his hands began to tremble. And when they revealed that DNA evidence had been recovered from Hannah's fingernails, traces that would later prove to be his, he broke down. His entire body sagged as if he could no longer hold up the weight of his lies. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. And then, the whole story emerged. Aaron Lively had been obsessed with Hannah. He had watched her in class, finding excuses to keep her after school. He had given her special attention and asked her about her life, dreams, and relationships. It started subtly, but Hannah noticed. And she didn't like it. According to her friends, she had begun avoiding him. She felt uncomfortable, but she didn't know how to handle it. Lively, however, took her rejection as something else, an insult. And then, Hannah found out something she wasn't supposed to know. There had been another girl before her. Another student had come forward with complaints about Lively's behavior. But the case had been quietly dismissed. The girl's parents had moved her to another school, and the issue had been swept under the rug. Hannah had planned to expose him. On the night of the dance, Lively had left her the note. He made it sound urgent, "Meet me after the dance. I need to talk." Maybe she thought he was going to apologize. Perhaps she thought he would leave her alone if she met him one last time. But when she got into his car, she realized too late that he wouldn't let her go. He drove her to the school, to the empty staff lounge, and tried to convince her to stay silent. He begged and threatened, but Hannah wasn't afraid to stand up for herself. She refused. That's when she ran. That's when he grabbed her. And that's when everything changed. Lively claimed he just wanted to talk, and that he never meant to hurt her. But when Hannah fought back, when she tried to scream, he panicked. He struck her hard. The first blow was out of desperation. But the next ones? Those were something else entirely. The town of Crescent Falls would never be the same. Parents who once trusted the local high school now questioned everything. Teachers who had worked alongside Lively wondered how they had missed the warning signs. And Hannah's family? They were left with memories of a bright, beautiful girl with her entire future ahead of her. Justice would come. Lively would be sentenced. But for those who loved Hannah, no sentence could undo the loss. She had trusted the wrong person. And it had cost her everything. The trial of Aaron Lively was one of the most closely watched cases in Crescent Falls history. The town that once prided itself on being a safe, close-knit community now found itself at the center of a legal battle determining whether justice would genuinely be served for Hannah Lawson. The courtroom was packed on the first day of proceedings. Hannah's parents sat in the front row, clutching each other for support. Just a few feet away, Aaron Lively sat with his legal team, dressed in a suit and tie, his expression unreadable. The prosecution was determined to paint him for what he was, a man who had meticulously planned an attack on a teenage girl who trusted him. The defense, however, had another strategy. From the beginning, Lively's lawyers pushed a narrative that stunned the courtroom. They argued that what happened to Hannah was not premeditated or calculated but rather a moment of passion. According to their defense, Lively had been overcome with emotions, that he had not planned to hurt her, and that her death had been a tragic accident. But the prosecution had no patience for excuses. They laid out the facts in painstaking detail, the surveillance footage, the fibers found on Hannah's clothing, the DNA evidence under her fingernails, and, most damning of all, his confession. They reminded the jury that Hannah was found with bruises covering her body, that she had fought for her life, and that this was not a moment of impulse but a deliberate act of violence. Hannah's friends took the stand, recounting how she had been uncomfortable with Lively's attention. One by one, they spoke of the moments that now seemed so obvious in hindsight, how he would keep her after class, how his compliments felt forced, how he always seemed to be watching. A former student who had long since graduated testified about her uncomfortable encounters with Lively. She had complained to the school, but nothing had been done. Then, Hannah's parents were there. No testimony was more potent than Hannah's mother's. She spoke through tears, describing the day her daughter was born and how she had grown into a young woman full of kindness and determination. She talked about Hannah's dreams, which she would never chase. Her father was next. A man who had spent his life protecting his little girl, only to wake up one day and realize he had been powerless to save her. His voice never wavered, but his pain was unmistakable. They wanted one thing. Not revenge. Not retribution. But justice. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. The courtroom was silent as the judge asked for the decision. Guilty. On all counts. The weight of those words was felt throughout the room. Hannah's mother let out a quiet sob, her husband holding her close. Across the courtroom, Lively stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. For the first time since his arrest, the reality of his fate seemed to settle in. The judge did not hesitate in delivering the sentence, life in prison, with no possibility of parole, the maximum punishment allowed under the law. There would be no appeals and no reduced sentences. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars. For many, the sentence brought relief. A dangerous man had been removed from society. Hannah's family would never have to see him walk free. But for those who loved Hannah, justice could never truly balance the weight of their loss. No court ruling could bring her back. As the trial concluded, Hannah's parents made one final statement. They would spend the rest of their lives honoring their daughter's memory, ensuring that no other family had to endure the same pain. Crescent Falls would heal, but it would never be forgotten. Hannah Lawson's story had come to an end in the courtroom. But her name would live on, not as a victim, but as a reminder that justice, though served, would never be enough to fill the space she left behind. The town of Crescent Falls would never be the same after Hannah Lawson's case. What was once considered a quiet, safe community was now a place marked by an unthinkable crime. Parents became more cautious, students more aware, and the trust that once existed between families and educators was forever shaken. The case forced local authorities and school administrators to re-evaluate their policies, particularly regarding hiring and monitoring school staff. In the aftermath, the school district implemented stricter employee background checks. Teachers, coaches, and staff members had to undergo more rigorous screenings, including psychological evaluations and continuous monitoring for inappropriate behavior. Anonymous reporting systems were also introduced, allowing students to speak up if they ever felt uncomfortable around an adult on campus. Additionally, Crescent Falls High School initiated annual self-defense workshops for students. The program, funded partly by donations from the community, focused on teaching teenagers how to recognize warning signs and protect themselves in dangerous situations. Hannah's friends were among the first to enroll, determined to turn their grief into action. Aaron Lively was transferred to a high-security prison after his sentencing. The facility, known for housing some of the most dangerous criminals in the state, became his permanent home. Reports from prison officials described him as largely unresponsive and withdrawn. He had no visitors, letters, or connection to the outside world. Despite multiple requests for interviews from journalists and actual crime investigators, Lively never spoke about the case again. His silence left many unanswered questions that would likely never be resolved. Did he regret what he had done? Or was he avoiding further scrutiny? Hannah's parents, meanwhile, refused to let their daughter's death be the end of her story. The months following the trial, they established the Hannah Lawson Foundation for Missing and Exploited Children. Their mission was clear: to prevent what happened to Hannah from happening to anyone else. Through fundraising efforts, the foundation provided resources for families of missing children, offering legal guidance, search and rescue coordination, and emotional support. Hannah's father, who had once hesitated to speak publicly, became a powerful advocate. He met with lawmakers, pushing for stricter sentencing for predators and improved protections for minors in educational settings. The foundation also funded scholarships in Hannah's name, awarded to students who shared her passion for veterinary medicine. Every year, on what would have been her birthday, her family gathered with supporters to honor her memory, ensuring that her kindness and ambition lived on through others. As authorities continued to investigate Lively's past, disturbing details emerged. It turned out that Hannah wasn't his only victim, she was simply the first one who fought back. Several former students came forward after his arrest, detailing experiences that, at the time, they had brushed off as uncomfortable encounters. Lively had spent years targeting young girls, manipulating their trust, and pushing boundaries. Some had received inappropriate messages, while others recalled being asked to stay after class for unnecessary reasons. One former student admitted that she had tried to report him years earlier, but her complaint had been ignored. The school, fearing controversy, had dismissed it as an overreaction. The realization that Hannah's tragedy could have been prevented weighed heavily on the community. One of the most unsettling revelations came from the forensic team examining Lively's belongings. Hidden in his home computer were journal entries, detailed accounts of his interactions with students, including Hannah. He had watched her for months, noting her habits, routines, and friendships. It became clear that what happened to her was not a random act of violence but a calculated decision made long before that fateful night. This discovery only deepened the sorrow surrounding the case. The justice system had done its part, Lively was locked away forever, but for those who had known Hannah, for those who had sat beside her in class, cheered with her at football games, or walked the same hallways, the knowledge that she had been targeted long before her disappearance was almost too much to bear. Years later, Crescent Falls still carried the weight of what happened. The scars left behind by Hannah's murder had not faded, but they had shaped a community determined to protect its children. Parents were more vigilant. Students were more vocal. And Hannah's name became a symbol, not just of loss, but of the change from it. The tragedy of her story would never be erased, but neither would her legacy. Hannah Lawson was just 16 years old. She had dreams, a bright future, and a loving family. She should have gone home that night, texting her friends about the dance and laughing about the night's events. Instead, her life was stolen in an act of unimaginable cruelty. Her story is a painful reminder that danger isn't always where we expect it to be. Sometimes, it's disguised as familiarity, hidden in places we trust the most. For the people of Crescent Falls, Hannah's death shattered their sense of security. Parents began to question who they could trust. Students, once carefree, now walked through school hallways with a lingering sense of unease. Her case was not just a crime, it was a wake-up call. It forced a town to confront the uncomfortable truth that predators don't always look like strangers in the dark. Sometimes, they are figures of authority standing in plain sight. Her family, left with a void that could never be filled, channeled their grief into action. The foundation they built in Hannah's name became more than just an organization, it became a lifeline for other families, a voice for those who might otherwise go unheard. It ensured that what happened to Hannah would never be forgotten. But the question remains, could it have been prevented? Should the school have done more? The warning signs were there. Complaints had been ignored. The system that was supposed to protect students had failed her. And while justice was eventually served, it came too late. Hannah's story is one of tragedy, but it is also one of change. Because of her, policies were strengthened. Voices that had once been silenced were finally heard. And amid unimaginable pain, a community found a way to fight back. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Could this have been stopped? What more could have been done? And if you haven't already done so, don't forget to subscribe. Next week, we uncover the case of a serial killer who evaded capture for decades. You won't believe how he was finally caught.